Great. Thank you, everybody. Good morning. At least it is morning here in Massachusetts. Welcome to Storytelling Through TTRPG Design. I am Rebecca Slitt. I will be your host for this, moderator for this panel. And I am really excited about this. We've got some excellent panelists who I could just sit and listen to for hours. So you are lucky to have them this morning. Some logistical stuff. I will be checking the Discord periodically throughout the panel so that I can catch your questions. I am definitely going to leave some time at the end of the panel for audience questions. So if you have any, please write them in there. We are in channel Bartholomew B in the Discord. So, introduce myself first. I am Rebecca Slitt, pronouns she, her. My interest in this topic is I am an editor and partner in Choice of Games. We do choice-based interactive fiction, and I've also done design work for a bunch of tabletop RPGs. And intersecting those, I've been the editor for some digital interactive fiction adaptations of tabletop RPGs. So I'm very interested in the intersection of all of these story elements. How do tabletop RPGs adapt into other forms, and how do narrative forms affect the way we play RPGs, and how do all of those interactive media harmonize with each other? So that's why I'm here, and let's have the other panelists introduce themselves. Please give your name, pronouns you'd like me to use during this panel, and something about your connection to this topic. And we'll go in, I guess, alphabetical order. So Brandon, why don't you go first?
Okay, every time it happens in alphabetical order, I'm usually the first person to go next. So, hello everyone. My name is Brandon O'Brien. I am a writer, performance poet, game designer, GM, podcaster, and a whole host of other things, hailing from Trinidad and Tobago. I am one of the hosts of the actual play podcast Speculate, where me and my fellow writer friends Gregory Wilson and Mike Underwood gather our fellow writer friends to play RPGs. I am presently working on my own role-playing game called Sound Clash, a Forged in the Dark game of music, magic, and sticking it to the industry when the industry doesn't love you. So I'm very excited to talk about how storytelling not only exists and flourishes in this space, but how we can find the other kinds of cultural touchstones that we also attach storytelling to and translate both of those things through RPG play. So yeah.
Great. Okay, Lauren?
Hi, I'm Lauren Roy. My pronouns are she, her. I am a writer and developer for RPGs. Mostly right now I'm working with Onyx Path on Exalted and a bunch of Chronicles of Darkness books. I've also written for Storium, which is a completely online role-playing game. I created a world for that, and I have worked for licensed properties for Green Ronin with Song of Ice and Fire and Dragon Age.
Great, thank you. And Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan Cross. My pronouns are she, her. I am a just RPG enthusiast. I design and stream TTRPGs with a special, really, really big place in my heart for Jamless and Propless RPGs, which is what I mostly both design and stream, based on the just real potential for good collaborative storytelling, which is why I'm here and also why I love TTRPGs so much.
Great, thanks so much. So I'd like to start by digging a little deeper into sort of where we started, which is what are some of the games that first got you interested in this topic? What were the first games that made you realize that design elements of a tabletop RPG could really foster storytelling? or some storytelling moments that made you realize that they had grown out of the design elements of the game. And let's start with Lauren, and we'll keep going around.
Okay.
But also, I mean, I don't want to be the one talking all the time. If you want to respond to each other, please do. The whole point of this is for you folks to have a great conversation among yourselves. But to avoid awkward pauses while we wait to see who talks first. Lauren, why don't you start us off?
Oh gosh, it's funny because I don't think I really started thinking about game design until I started writing for them. Up until that point, it had been like, read rules, roll dice. And when I played a game called Always Never Now, it's written by Will Hindmarch. It's based on, I believe, the Lady Blackbird system, where you are you have setting elements and you have things there. I think they're called keys. It's been a very long time since I played this. I apologize.
If it's the same as Lady Blackbird, then keys, yeah.
Yeah. And so there are like certain things about your character that when you use that key, it gives you a bonus. But one of the cool things that he did with the game too is you have a dice pool in the middle it's stunt dice. And if somebody else in the scene is doing something cool, you can give them extra dice to roll. And so it fosters that collaboration between the players. So it's not just the GM saying, here's what you do, here's the scene, here's how many dice you roll. It's this person just like jumped up onto a helicopter and is, holding onto the bar by one arm, and okay, we need them to do something. So everybody like hands them a pile of dice. And it was just that element of putting bringing the players in as co-storytellers in a way that I really loved.
Awesome, thanks. Megan?
And yeah, for me, it's absolutely, and I talk about it all the time as one of my favorite games is Dialect by Thorny Games. The first time I played Dialect, it was like the Galaxy Brain meme, like opening up for what good what good game design, what a game written to collaboratively build a world and tell a story is possible, what it makes possible, and everything about that game, and I rave about it all the time as just this benchmark for truly collaborative immersive storytelling. And the first time I played it, I can still recall so clearly in my mind the words that we created during the game, the story that we told. Like, there are games that I've played that still elicit like such a strong emotional reaction because the game is built to tell lasting stories with people. And I played it, I'm like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to create games that allow this level of storytelling and this level of collaboration amongst players to create something that's really lasting in the memories of the people who are playing it.
Great. Brandon?
As for me, two very distinct kind of examples stand out, and much like in Lauren's case, I'd never really thought about those things until I actually had to engage with it as a creator, but not always necessarily because I was making things for them or making things in that space, but because I was like operating as a creator in another sense. So one of the like more interesting examples is as a poet, I spent a lot of time around theater kids. Um, and while I was working as a member of a theater group, I recommended to a group of people that it would be really nice for us to play a game of Fiasco and see if a story would come out of that that would be good to like turn into a play or something like that. And it was lots of fun and very wild, and no one at the table when we played knew what the game was until we began, and the story that we came up with was wild and fun and hilarious. And I like always really wanted to engage with that again because when you put tools like that in the hands of people who are excited to embody a character, especially actors, performers who are really good at just turning that on sometimes. It's like really engaging to watch. And my other example is the belonging outside belonging system. In particular, Dream Askew by Avery Alder is really, really beautiful. Avery is actually like responsible for helping me like decide I wanted to start designing in the first place before I even saw Dream Askew. And then like witnessing exactly how like um elegant it is in getting people to just um perform in this other space without like thinking too hard about who they are or what they're doing, just embodying the moves that they're given and letting those things engage the way that they see themselves in the space that they're in is actually really inspiring.
Ah, yes. Oh, love Dream Askew. And I want to get back to the idea of actors and performers because I know several of you are involved in actual plays and streaming, and I really want to talk about how that affects RPG design and how that affects the way we interact with it. But I want to pick up on another thread that multiples of you have already talked about, which is GMless games. And many of the games that you've already mentioned as really exemplary storytelling games are GMless. And I think that's really interesting. And I'd love to hear you talk more about that. In a lot in games with GMs, it's the GM who creates the story and the players interact with it that way. So what are the tools specific to GMless games that help foster storytelling? What are the design elements that put that storytelling in the hands of the players? And Megan, I think it's your turn to start.
Yeah. So for me, it's when I design mostly GMless games because that's what I play more often than not and what I know and where my heart is. And really, for me, it's about creating a game that has the tools for the players to build something collaboratively. And that's really where I start off when I'm designing is putting the tools in place, giving the right prompts, asking the right questions, creating a structure that the players can then go to and build off of together. Because I want to make sure that every aspect of the game is collaborative, because I think that's obviously the biggest divide between like a game with a GM and a game that's GMless is rather than it's one person directing the story, it's everybody together telling a story, creating a world, um, moving the story along and making sure you're creating that kind of level ground for everybody to come together on the same level and each have the same impact on the story as anybody else would. So that's really the biggest thing for me is just making sure that it's has the opportunity for every player to affect the story in the same way.
Mhm.
Great.
I think what's also very valuable when it comes to making a GMless experience is a lot of the ways in which we assume a GM's role in RPG play is that they're the referee for things that players cannot decide or arbitrate on their own. But when you give players the opportunity to be arbitrators on everybody else's behalf, and you frame that not as it is my job to see whether this went right or wrong, but it is our job collectively to reward the story in interesting narrative ways. Um, you get players who, even when the game starts and they don't necessarily know where they want to go, because everybody is essentially working towards being their fellow PCs' biggest fans in play, essentially. Um, they are encouraging interesting story beats, asking interesting questions about where characters think they want to go or where they want the story to intersect. And ultimately, learning more about not only how to play that game, but how to play it in a way that rewards everybody's story and gives everybody a chance to do something interesting because they want to see where the story goes and knows that they're placing that in each other's hands because everybody else has placed it in theirs, which is really neat.
I think one of the cool things that I've seen with some of the GMless, or I guess maybe GM Light might also be what I would call, there's Last Best Hope, which is from Magpie Games, I think, and it's I think you take turns being the storyteller as you go around during different rounds. But what it does is it encourages everybody to add elements to the world building as you set up the story. So one person might be you're on a ship trying to keep the sun from going out, and one person's the ship's navigator, and so you can introduce a problem of, oh, I noticed that there's a crack in the hull, and somebody else might be the ship medic, and oh, the supplies are running low, and so everybody gets to add a little bit of tension to the plot that will come up at some point. And one of the other things that it does is at the start, at character creation, you have to say something about another character that this person, I'm friends with them because of this, or this person and I have some tension between each other because of this other thing. And at different points in the story, whoever's running that particular scene can draw on those interactions, or those what's the word I'm looking for, those
Bonds.
preset, yes, between the characters, and it really kind of makes it feel like everybody is invested in the story, like Brandon was saying, that you get to kind of bring all of these things together as important elements. And I liked what Megan was saying about prompts too, because I've had GMs who start the game with, tell me about a time that you and this character did, this character saved your life. And it kind of makes you think at the start and create those connections.
Right. And it
Yeah.
sets up the story at the beginning. It's like, all right, this is the kind of world in which people need to save each other's lives. And so establishing things about that. Yeah, I'd love to hear other examples of, from games that you've written yourself or other games that have inspired you, of specific design elements like that work well to build story in GMless games.
Yeah, I'll hop in. I know, like Lauren was saying, bond building is something that is very, very important to me, both as a player of TTRPGs and as a designer of TTRPGs. Having a reason for these people to be together and be interacting besides, well, we know the players want to play together, so the characters want to play together. Being able to create those bonds, and I think one of the first games that I had read, where the bond building mechanic built into it just made me go, oh my god, this is amazing, was Royal Blood by Grant Howitt, because the way that the bond building is written, and the same thing, he did the same thing for Spire, which is one of my favorite games, is it's a question. It's a list of questions, and it's turn to the person on your left and ask them one of these questions. And it's questions like, why do you love me? What can I never forgive you for? What do you know about me that nobody else does? And it's those kinds of like deep questions that make you create those bonds with other characters right from the onset. And then he takes it one step further in Spire, where it's questions like that, where it's one of the other party members has romantic feelings for you and they don't know that you know, and those kinds of things. But then they also create bonds with NPCs, where it's you have a bond with somebody in the city who admires you, and those kind of things. And it connects your character not just to the other party members, but also to the world at large. And I feel like that's so helpful for creating a very immersive experience, as well as fleshing out the world, that you're building collaboratively for this game. So I think bond building is probably like my favorite thing about TTRPGs, and creating the mechanics, to really create in-depth characters and relationships within, the party.
So I guess I'll jump in here and just like um I hate tooting my own horn, but there is when I like started really getting into belonging outside belonging games, because at that point I was like heavily tinkering with it. I was experimenting with like an adaptation that I think is still very neat and very useful in terms of how it generates certain kinds of conflict through games, which is in outside belonging, as Avery already intended. Individual players make their own moves, which are obviously interactions with other players, but whether you gain or spend a token is deliberately in that singular player's hands. And I asked, like, which I think is very valuable, but I was asking, well, how do you make that even more interesting between a pair of players, um, or like a trio of players? And I tinkered with the idea of group moves, where, for instance, if two players decide that they're definitely going to get in a fight and that fight is going to end emotionally poorly for them, both of them gain tokens. Um, but if they get back together and have like a very emotionally vulnerable heart to heart, both of them engage with tokens as well in that moment. So players are encouraged not only to think about what they want to do individually and wait for other players to engage with that individually as well, but also ask each other, well, do we think that it is dramatically valuable for us to just immediately get in this fight instead of I do the thing and you figure out how you respond to it? And I think that um, generating that kind of play not only leans on the bonds that are already very strong, the bond making mechanics that are already very strong in the game, but asks those players to like consistently engage with them in ways that are radical, instead of one player making a decision that they do want to engage in that way and the other player like still being up in the air about whether they want this to end badly or not. Sometimes it's just rewarding to just have an emotional outburst and know that that is mechanically rewarding for everyone at the table.
I like that too because it means that the actions always should have consequences in games, but it makes players consider one another in that way.
Mhm.
Like that, because sometimes you just bulldoze through and go, I'm going to do this thing, and you upset somebody else at the table. And I really like that mechanic that it kind of makes you bring everybody in. That's cool.
Yeah, thank you. Because like I was also thinking, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anybody actually engage with the game in this way, but I do think it is mechanically possible to play belonging outside belonging games as what I call an emotional murder hobo.
I love it.
All right, please unpack that.
Which is like not like I don't want to say that it's an oversight of the system, because the system is actually really brilliant, but it is very possible to, once you have the tokens necessary, to just make emotional decisions and wait for the table to figure out how they feel about it, which uh responsibly, like a good table has like safety tools and stuff to ensure that people aren't doing that to bulldoze the experience, but giving players an opportunity to negotiate amongst each other. This is what I think is valuable for us narratively in this moment. Do you want to engage with that? Is I think a very neat way not only to get to those kinds of emotional experiences, but to have that input and those consequences be in the hands of all of the players who are making that decision, instead of just throwing the ball and hoping that somebody wants to catch it.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Also, Lauren, your cat is beautiful.
Oh, that was Fizzgig.
Oh wow, that's a brilliant name.
Yes.
When we first got him, he looked when he was in his carrier, he looked very much like the Dark Crystal little. I can't remember what Fizzgigs are, but
Aw, sweet kitty. All right. Sorry, I am done being distracted by cats. All right.
if it's
So,
possible to be.
yes,
We'll try our best.
I'll never be done being distracted by everybody's adorable pets. Anyway, so circling back to the question of setting, we were talking about one of the strengths of a lot of these GMless games from storytelling perspective is distributing the world building, giving players opportunities to tie story elements into world building and having them generate that themselves. How does that work in games with predetermined settings? Lauren, you mentioned that you have worked in a lot of licensed properties, and I know others of you have worked in other games with predetermined settings. How, when you have a setting given to you, or when you're writing a setting that will persist across all plays of a certain game, how do you build in those narrative elements that will foster storytelling when it's you, the author, creating the setting instead of giving players tools to create that? And we'll start with Lauren, since I started directing that question at you.
I think a lot of that still applies from what we've already been talking about, because I think I like doing a session 0 where you kind of talk to your players about who they want to play, how they know each other, what kinds of things they want to do, and that lets them both bring in their ideas to the background and lets them ask you questions about the setting that they might want to engage with. We have a friend of ours, we started playing Exalted a while back, and she had never played, but the rest of us all had. So we were all very familiar with the setting. And she wasn't. And she had an idea for a character that was being ported over, I think, from another game or another role-playing character that she had. And we all figured out how to bring her into that setting, just from our familiarity with it. So I think, I'm a big fan of you do what works for your table. And so you have the world that's there, but you also have the world that you kind of create at the same time. So you're sort of building your own structure within it, if that makes any sense. So you in it sometimes that's you're playing a game set in this city that is a really great place for heist stories, or you're playing a game set in this story where you're going to be a bunch of ghost hunters. And so you get to kind of tweak the setting to your characters and to the story you want to tell.
Um, so I am inclined to agree that you do what is best for the table at all times. But I guess what kind of stands out to me is there's a quote by the young adult novelist John Green, who's in a YouTube video. He says, "Books belong to their readers." And I do think that tabletop RPGs belong to their players as well. Like you can, if I go to a game shop right now and buy Curse of Strahd, for instance, um, whatever I say happens in Ravenloft still trumps what's in the book. If I never opened the book a day in my life and say we're playing in Ravenloft, and Ravenloft happens to be an island in the Caribbean that is very bright and never has the kind of dark, gloomy, gothic vibes that everybody else thinks it's supposed to have, and we decide that that's fun, then that's Ravenloft. That's just canon, and no one can tell us no. And I think that encouraging players as a result to not feel like they're tied to assumptions about the worlds that they're playing, especially if they don't already know those spaces, is really rewarding. Like, um, this this is not quite the same, I'm sure, but in the actual playtest of my game Soundclash that I'm presently running, um, there are established rules about how things happen in that world, but the world itself is purely defined by players. I just the game literally starts with me in session 0. I literally started by telling my players, at some point in recent history, magic has entered the world and it has affected the way that music is played and performed. What happened? Please, you tell me what
Yes.
happened. You tell me where you grew up. You tell me what landmarks in your area are important to you. Tell me why those places are important to you. Tell me who you've met there. Tell me if there are any significant historical events that have taken place there. And that was where we played. And I think that that's similarly possible even when you're playing something that you got straight out of a handbook for your game, because the place, I mean, not to be mean to the hard work of the writers and designers who generate these kinds of spaces for these books, but it doesn't really exist. You're never actually going to see those physical landmarks. So you could put that, and you could put this church anywhere you want. You can have this school anywhere you want. You cannot have them near school. And I think that giving players the opportunity to define those spaces, even in like a hard and fast location, from one of those texts, is kind of vital to them feeling like they are genuinely bonded to that experience instead of just essentially just marking time in a location that someone has given them.
Yeah, I think the big part is prioritizing player enjoyment and connection with the narrative and the story you're telling over existing lore. I've played games in settings that I knew nothing about, in a way stressing about whether or not I'm getting the lore right or if I'm getting some aspect of it right, like took away from my immersion and enjoyment of just playing the game, because I was so concerned with, this is how it stands, this is the lore that exists, can I do this, rather than just letting go and creating a pocket within this world that already exists in which you have the say over what you do. Like, the world as a whole can exist the way it does, but you can carve out a little space for it yourself, that if that's how you want to engage with the world, if that's how you're going to connect with the world and tell your best story and be engaged with the other players in the world as it stands, like, that's always should be the priority, is telling a good story and just being able to engage with the world however you best engage with it.
Great, thanks. And we've circled back to actual play, which is a question that I really, really wanted to engage with. So we'll start with Megan, because I know you've done a bunch of streaming and actual play. How does the act of performing an RPG essentially affect the way you deal with the storytelling elements? You know, you are creating something for an audience, and that creates different expectations for what you're going to produce. How does that affect the way you interact with the design? And how does that, if you as a designer are creating a game that you know is going to be streamed or done in an actual play, what are the story elements that you want to put into that kind of game? How do you as a streamer or performer interact with that story to create something that will resonate more effectively with an audience?
Yeah, playing TTRPGs on a stream is a totally different world than playing TTRPGs offline. Um, and I think the biggest part, the group I stream currently, I'm in a ongoing quest campaign in the group that I stream with. We've been streaming together for almost 2 years as a group. And we start off as, it's a game for us first, and people come and watch, which I think is a big part of it, is knowing that you're playing it to enjoy the game as a player. You still have it in the back of your mind, like, you want to tell a good story and you want to engage and have people enjoy the stories that you're telling. And all of us, I have a theater background as well, so it's that aspect of just like embodying a character and getting to embody this character and move as them throughout this world is so interesting and fun, and getting to have that character progression if you're playing in a campaign that lasts um longer than that. As a designer and as someone, I run a monthly stream where we play one-offs of GMless and prepless games. So it's just for that 3 hours, you are this character playing a game. And I think in games like that, what's most important to me when I'm designing games or when I'm choosing games is to play is I look at the character creation almost as the first starting point. Because if I am engaged with the character creation and know that you can create something really cool and embody a character really cool because you're playing them for such a short time, that's kind of something that I usually go first to character creation after reading like your elevator pitch of the game and that kind of thing. Just being able to dig in and create a character, and that's where most of the games when I'm designing starts, is what kind of characters are playing these games, what do I want the players to know more than anything about these characters, and then kind of cycling from there. And I think it comes from the performance background of wanting to embody a character and play a role, that bleeds into pretty much everything else I do when I'm playing TTRPGs.
Yeah, Brandon, you mentioned doing actual plays of games that you were writing, and I'd love to hear more. And I'd love to hear more about how that affects your writing process, and how your audience received that. And I also really want to hear more about Sound Clash because that just sounds really cool.
Thank you very much. I'm always very excited when people want to hear about this thing because then it inspires me to finally get it finished. It's presently being held together by like duct tape and hope.
That is, as they say, a mood.
Relatable.
Which is like a very very kind of traumatic but also very inspiring experience to play a game that doesn't 100% exist, because it means that a lot of the writing processes are being evolved on the fly. For instance, it's a Forge in the Dark game, so there's supposed to be a crew sheet as well, which is in this case the band sheet. But my players hadn't actually seen what the band sheet looks like until 2 sessions ago. Because I was trying to not only craft an experience that was true to like the intent that I had for the game when it is finally finished, but also trying to navigate the goals that the players themselves wanted for their characters. And also try to present that in a way that is engaging for the audience. And engagement for an audience, I think, is different in a lot of different circumstances. So the thing that I think I value the most in actual play sessions of Sound Clash is, am I capturing the mood that I think I'm supposed to capture with this like general genre? Which is, does every individual session of Sound Clash feel as much as an episode of Gem and the Holograms as possible?
I love it.
Bless. Yes.
I'm glad that you all dig this. But also, am I like capturing the kind of more radical intent of the game as well, which is asking both the players and the audience to think more deeply about how entertainers navigate their entertainment industries and the kind of perils of trying to get into those industries very with like little information or through the manipulation of people who want to literally just gain power over you, and how that relationship makes it complicated not only to relate to the industry but to relate to fans and to relate to yourself and to relate to the work that you make. Um, and I try as often as possible to craft like individual moments of that play experience that capture that, while not like expecting players to like actually sing, for instance. So a lot of those experiences are like, how do I get someone to roll dice in a way that feels genuinely thematically like they are learning something, like they're having a performative experience, like they're witnessing someone else's performative experience, and that audiences are seeing that as this is a group of people who are getting into the industry, getting into the music industry for the first time, and this is what it feels like for it to be so fraught. For the band that is playing in the sessions that I'm playing right now are a punk band. In a universe where when magic entered their setting, their local governments decided to stamp out punk because they didn't want that kind of magic to affect the way that they rule the world. Um, so, like, a lot of that experience is also you are discovering this radical thing for the first time, and I'm trying to make that feel as authentic as possible, not only for the players, but for the audience, even though everybody knows what punk music is already. So I'm trying to like create an experience where everybody feels like they're experiencing something new and challenging for the very first time, and that it feels as radical as it's supposed to feel.
Thank you.
I just hope that I'm pulling it off, but thank you.
Thanks. Lauren, have you had any streaming experience or actual play? Or you mentioned the aspect of performing for the other players. Have you had any audience experience?
I've done a couple of, I actually did a speculate game a while back, and I've done a couple of actual plays for a con. And I think that the neat thing that the storytellers did was sort of let you, sometimes they provide a character sheet, which has been helpful, because one of the things that can slow down pacing in those things is if you're going, oh, I have to figure out how many dice I have to roll, hold on, let me do all this math and gather up my dice. And you know sometimes roll 20 obviously helps with that, and programs that will roll dice for you. I like having the big old fistful of dice to roll at the table, plus it sounds fun. Just the clatter. I think it was Marie Bilodeau during the speculate game. She was rolling dice at the table, and you could just hear it come over the microphone. It was great. But having that thing where it's already set up for you, where if I'm going to punch somebody, I'm going to roll this many dice. If I'm going to try to lie my way out of this situation, I'm going to roll that many dice. Having that helps keep the pacing going. But I still like having that sort of aspect of uncertainty, because the audience gets excited with you if you roll really high or really low. Like, that reaction is also kind of helpful. Or if you have people in the chat going, oh, you should do this, and it gives you something to jump off of, like that yes and aspect of it. When people are engaging with what you're doing and the story that you're telling, and they're like, oh, I bet there's this thing going on over there, and it gives you more to work with, and it's sort of, that's a really fun aspect of it for me.
Awesome, thanks. We are moving to the end of these sessions, so I want to get a couple questions from the audience before asking you to wrap up. So folks, if you have any other questions, please put them in the Discord and I will get at them. One that we have right now is, do you have any advice for replicating world building collaboration in GM'd games? And you touched some on this in the way in your advice on how to interact with pre-written source material, but as a player, as a GM, how can you replicate that kind of collaboration in creating the world?
Session zeros.
Cool.
Session zeros.
Yes, can you go into a little more?
Yes,
I know what that means, but it's a new enough topic that not everybody might know what that means. So yeah.
So session zeros, I do them with all of the games that I'm in or games that I am running. Usually you can do anything in a session zero. A lot of times it's character creation, talking about what everybody wants out of the game, like tonally going over safety tools is really important. But in the last couple of games, longer term games that I've played in, and including a masks game that I'm currently running, we did a session zero for character creation, safety tools, tone, that stuff. And then we did another session zero all about world building, in which together we were like, this is the world that we are in, like everybody create like, what is one place in this world that is important to your character? What goes on there? Where are you? In doing that kind of thing and bringing all of the players in right from the start helps them get invested with the world. And also during play, something that I picked up from the actual play podcast Protean City Comics, which is one of my favorite actual plays. It's an ongoing masks game. Something that the GMs ask all the time is, like, a player would be like, oh, I want to go XYZ, and the GM will go, okay, well, what's there? What is this building? What does it do? Who's there? And puts it back onto the players to help the players build the world so that it's not just the GM that's building this giant thing. So when the GM, instead of being like, oh yeah, I know exactly what this building is, it's XYZ, putting it back on the players and saying, why don't you tell me what's there? Why do you want to, like, what is there that makes you want to go? And I think that really helps the collaborative bit because the GM is steering the ship, so to speak, but the players are all crew members on it and have just as much of a say in the story that they want to tell. So putting in pieces of collaboration whenever you can really helps for that as well.
I definitely second that. I do a lot of that in the games that I GM as well. First of all, I just generally think that giving players prompts is always useful. Like when you ask a player a question, any question at all, that is often far more valuable than simply putting them in a position to do something, to respond to something that you've given them to respond to. But also, um, like the benefits of that collaboration are very, very vast. A joke that I make with the Blades in the Dark game that I GM for Speculate is that um when they are fully engaged with making the setting on their own, it means that I don't have to learn things because they've just told me. One of the most interesting experiences as a result, like one of the things that comes out of that as well is that you're also encouraging players to do that work before you ask them, because one of the most engaging experiences I've had in that Blaze in the Dark game was that we had previously established that one of the characters prays to a forgotten god who is not in the book, who's not like in Blades in the Dark proper, who has become like meaningful to their understanding of their own culture and their own clashes within their own culture, but has also interestingly showed up in the grander narrative that they're already engaged in. And then they find themselves in a situation where they're in a building full of hostile NPCs who share the same cultural background as them, and they decided all on their own to create this entire like narrative about spiritually why they're there, and they try to convince like a gang boss that one of their friends is actually a priest to that god, and that they're here to like give that person some like perfect wisdom. And I went, you know what? Because you did all of that work, I'm not going to make you have to give a sway roll. You've swayed me, so that means you've swayed them. Um, and like when you encourage players to do that kind of work, not only in terms of like um places or NPCs that they establish, but how they interact with those places and how they give those things greater value. Um, like that is a rewarding experience for everybody, because not only are you actually genuinely fleshing out that world, but you're doing it through performance and through play, and you're like genuinely being in that character. You're genuinely trying to embody that space as much as possible. And like once you tell players that that's a thing that they can do, it means that they're no longer beholden to you as like the puppet master god of the story. They know that they are genuinely making that story with you, and that all of their input is genuinely as valuable as whether you tell them that the dice went well or poorly.
It's great. Lauren, have you got any advice to build on that?
I think one thing to keep in mind beyond session 0 too is every once in a while going back and checking in with your characters of, here's how far you've come, here are some of the things you've accomplished. take a look at those early notes in your early character sheet, and are there things that your character wants to do that they want to build on? Are there things that are in the background that we talked about that haven't really come into play? And doing that occasional check-in of what sort of stories you want to see, even if it's after an intense session or if it's at the end of a story arc, kind of the where do we go from here. It's not just about the story that the GM is trying to tell, but it's also about the story the players are trying to tell, and that's kind of what makes it all cool. And so even though it's within an established setting, you still get some say over where things go.
Awesome, thanks. We are just up against time, so let's give everybody one more thing. What design elements would you like to see more of? What is very cool that you think people are not using enough to foster storytelling in tabletop RPGs? And I'll just throw this open, and whoever is inspired first.
More prompts. I want to see somebody write an entire RPG book that is just a list of questions.
Ah.
I love prompt. The majority of the games I've written are prompt-based games. I love prompts. My big thing, bond building mechanics. There are games that do it so well, and I'm seeing it more often in games that are coming out now. But when you give your characters a reason why they are together and why they're interacting, it makes the story easier to GM. It makes it more immersive for the players, and it makes it more interesting for the characters, and adds like an additional dynamic beyond the story as a whole. So bond building for sure.
I like games that reward failure, and I'm starting to see more of it where if your dice sucked, you still get something out of it, and that way you're not afraid of rolling, you're not afraid of failing at whatever the thing is. It's that sort of concept of the flip side of yes and is no but. You don't get to do this, but this is the other thing that you get from it, or because this roll over here was terrible, maybe you get a bonus to a roll later on. I like that because it keeps you from being too discouraged.
Great, thank you very much. We are at time, so we should clear out and make room for the next panel. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to Brandon and Megan and Lauren and Lauren's cats. And thank you. And thank you to our audience. I know this is early for some of you, so thank you for getting up early on a Sunday morning. And if you have any last questions, any last thoughts, drop them in the Discord. I will be there, and some of our panelists will be too. So thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing all the excellent things that you create.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.